We are back talking about the Expanse once again. More than likely just the first half up to episode 7, but I'm joined by my good friend Josh from Comic Q. Josh, how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. I'm super excited to talk about this season with you. This was a heartbreaking season when it first came out. I was watching it, and at the time, it seemed like The Expanse was going to be canceled. So obviously, that didn't happen. But yeah, I'm really excited to talk about this season with you.
I didn't realize that discussion was happening at around the time that this season came out. So that's interesting. I didn't know that.
I really enjoyed rewatching this. It had been a while. I think I only watched the episodes in the season once when it first came out. So everything felt fresh. It felt unfamiliar. So it was really kind of like watching it for the first time since it had been so long since I had watched it. And yeah, my initial impression that, each season kind of gets better as we go, that seems to hold up. The first half of season 3 wasn't my favorite, but the second half really, really good. And yeah, season 4 excellent, season 5 even better. So this trajectory keeps on going up.
At least in your opinion, it continues to get better, because a lot of shows, as the longer they go, the worse the seasons get, kind of degrade. So very excited to keep going, and certainly think I agree that I enjoyed the second half of the season more than the first, but plenty happened, of course, and we can jump right into that. So just looking at some of the notes we have on some of these first few episodes. So we do get evidence of the proto molecule, or at least a little bit of it, being on the ship, which was interesting. And I don't really understand maybe how that got missed, because my understanding is they scanned for it and whatnot. So I thought that was interesting that.
Or was that this season and that was the first time we had seen the goo on the ship? I can't remember how that panned out.
That's a good question. They might have showed that right at the end of season 2, and they were just reminding us at the beginning of season 3. So that's very possible that maybe we knew that, and they just showed it again to remind people, because it was a big deal.
Yeah, because they picked it up on Ganymede, right? With the hybrid attacking the ship, like leaving a piece behind. At least I assume that's when that happened.
Yeah. Yes, I believe that's exactly right, in terms of when it got onto the ship. Other major parts that we have for the first few episodes was, of course, the Aaron Wright situation, with him framing Christian and saying that she's the one working for Mao, and then that they should destroy the ship that she's on with Mao currently. So very high stakes to go off the bat in episode 1 in terms of that storyline in regards to her being attacked. So was very interested to see how far into the season they were going to address that, if that was going to be dragged out, if it was going to be something that would happen right away, which of course it did, and then left to them having to do their little escape plan. But I don't know, did you ever have any doubt that they were gonna somehow get away? Because I certainly thought for sure that there was no way that was going to be something they would hold on to.
Yeah, no, I didn't really. Some main characters do have what feels like plot armor in a sense. So even without having read the books or anything, it's like you can tell which characters are probably going to be around for the majority of this show, the majority of these seasons. But it was, like you said, the word intense, suspenseful, all of that definitely applied for that scene. We saw that's when Bobby took over the Razorback actually. So that was cool, seeing that come full circle from season 1 with Julie's ship. And then we get more of the Mao family goodness in the second half of the season, of course, too, but kind of always coming back to the central themes and items and what do I want to say here? The stuff that the story revolves around, like these ships, obviously the Rocinante, the Razorback, all these things are like core, and they keep showing up. And I thought that was really cool that when I watch season 1, it's like you don't ever think the Razorback is going to be a recurring motif in the show, but here it is again. So that was really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, the other part of the Aaron Wright situation being his manipulation of the president, I guess we'll say, in terms of trying to get him to be a little more aggressive on the war side. And not think too much about the potential casualties that could come out of it. So pushing him to fire first. So we have that as well in terms of his motivations that he has. So ultimately we get Billy and Christian, which I guess isn't too surprising. When they're running away, they send out the signal to a Martian ship.
Bobby and Christian.
Yeah, Bobby and Christian. Sorry, you're correct. Misspoke there. Ultimately get found by the Rossi, which again, it seemed really obvious at the time when it happened. I was like, oh, I should have thought that was who was going to find them. But it wasn't something I was currently thinking about, but certainly very convenient, don't you think?
It is. Everything in this story is super convenient, which is kind of nice because, you know, the idea of like, there is kind of a element of fate in the show, which makes some of these like super contrived conveniences and coincidences like we'll let it pass, it's okay. Like having Christian meet Holden and then bringing Bobby on board the Rocinante for the first time, super coincidental, but I love it.
Yeah, it certainly is
coincidental. And then especially when you think of how big the solar system is, like obviously.
Yeah, that is true. That makes it even more really unlikely. And I think opinion. The idea of those characters interacting is more exciting to me than the idea of that happening accidentally. Like I can forgive the accidental nature of it for the fact that, oh, it's going to be really cool to see these characters interact with one another.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely worth it.
Yeah. So character I want to talk about that's introduced fairly quickly in episode 2 is Anna. I don't really know how to pronounce her full name, but was very excited to see her in terms of her character, and or at least the actress playing her. I recognized her immediately, and I was like, I'm pretty sure that's the girl from Lost. Looked it up, and of course it was. So I hadn't seen her in anything in a while. I'm sure she's been in stuff, but I was just excited to see what she was going to bring, because I assumed she'd be an important character just based off of who was playing her and what her relationship was with the president.
It was cool. So in the books, I don't think she's introduced until season 4. So it was kind of nice in the first half of, book 4. So in the first half of season 3, having her introduced was kind of cool to have the political stuff drawn out, having very much a devil on the shoulder, angel on the other shoulder for the what's not the president, the leader of the UN, you know, with having Aaron Wright and then Anna on each side of him. And it was kind of cool how each of them were lit and dressed in some scenes. Like it was very very heavy-handed with, you know, Anna wearing white and Savitar wearing black and being like darkly lit and everything. So it was really cool kind of to see that as a way to introduce her character.
Well, you also have the fact that she's literally a religious figure vocationally, so she's very much the angel in that situation.
Yeah, quite literally.
And then immediately, or one of the first things that initially happens when she first gets there, of course, is the strike against Mars that Aaron Wright ultimately convinces the president to do, which again, a lot of conflict going back and forth between Aaron Wright and Anna in that situation, and their conversations that they have. And we do get the scene of the attack against Mars, and we unfortunately have the event of one nuke making it through. I don't remember where it hit in the US. That's blanking me.
South America. I forget exactly what city, but
that
was a really cool scene. I was not expecting the show to go that direction, to have, you know, a mass casualty event like that. Yeah, definitely up to the stakes.
Yeah, and I believe the number I have in the notes was 2 million people. So just trying to put that in context and how how somebody might respond in a leadership position if they say, hey, 200 or 2 million people on the planet were just instantly killed. So that obviously escalated things just a little bit.
Oh, and it would have been so much worse too, right? With that whole scene where they had stealth missiles, right, that were launched. And so that was pretty tense too. Like just imagine if all of those, or, you know, even 50% of them had hit. Absolutely catastrophic.
Yeah, and I agree. It was a scene, or at least a situation I wouldn't have expected as early as it was in the show, with mass casualty on that level. And the devastation in that regard, but was excited to see where that led in terms of the emotional response from the president on that one. So um, the next section that I have set up is the Agatha King, I guess, storyline is what I'll call it. And before we go further, I have to ask, is that any influence on our D&D campaign that you ran?
Oh, it was prior to that. So for our view, and completely coincidental. I just like the sound of the name Agatha. So that's
Okay.
all.
I just, every time I heard Agatha, and I was like, maybe Josh was watching the show around the time that he was
You
DMing
know
that
what? It is
campaign. So
possible it subconsciously slipped in. That is definitely a possibility. I'm not going to rule it out. It wasn't a
yeah,
conscious decision, though.
had to ask just because as I was typing that up, I was like, seems like too much of a coincidence because the timeline kind of matches up with when I think we were doing that campaign. But
It
had to ask.
is, and it gets worse because it was the home of that castle where the king lived. So it was literally, yeah. So it's possible that that was
Okay.
completely subconsciously influenced.
Well, my head canon will be that that's what it was. So
Awesome.
What has so Kodiar gets found. I think I'm pronouncing his name right. Kodiar is found ultimately. He was separate from Billy and Christian in that regard. So he gets picked up by Agatha King, which is I guess, an Earth ship technically, correct?
Correct. The UN, I think the
UNN.
flagship of the UN Navy,
Yeah.
UNN. Yep.
Mhm.
United
Okay.
Nations Navy. Yep.
Gotcha. So he has the conversation with I believe, I don't know, is lieutenant or captain when in regards to the Christian situation, and does not believe the story that he's telling in regards to he believes Christian to be a traitor and threatens Kodiar to with treason with that story. And I think you get a pretty
Mhm.
big hint early on that there's something off with Wen, just in regards to how he responds to. But did you feel anything about him, or did you think he was somebody that was ultimately a good character?
No, immediately you're drawn to Souther, and you really like, is he an Admiral Souther, Admiral Souther, and Admiral Wynn?
Could be.
Like you're immediately drawn to Souther, and you really like that character, and you're like, okay, that guy seems trustworthy. Whereas Admiral Wynn, something seems off about him, and you're a little bit suspicious about what his motivations might be. And then as you watch, he gets more and more unhinged, but he's slightly unhinged enough when you first meet him that you can really tell that that thread is going to be pulled and he's just going to unravel from whatever it is he's dealing with.
Yeah, I like what you said about Southerner. He is certainly a character that as soon as he showed up, somebody that you knew that was going to be trustworthy in regards to or at least integrity, I guess, is the word that comes to mind with him. He seems like
Definitely.
somebody who's very committed to his post and is willing to do what needs to happen if he believes something to be true, which he ultimately does believe Courtyard in regards to his story about Christian. And like you said, we start to see some more unhinging of Wen in regards to taking command of the Agatha King so that they could divert to IO, which I think at that point we have a pretty good idea who he's working with in regards to like
Yeah.
why else would he want to go to IO.
Yeah, for sure. And it's cool too with the sci-fi element, not sci-fi because I guess this is real, but the communications delay between ships too, and
Mm-hmm.
how that influences things too. So you have this ship and the fleet away from, I think that's like a 37-minute delay or something
Mm-hmm.
from Earth. And so watching Admiral Souther try to figure out not only okay, who can he believe, but then when time becomes a crucial element, he really has to act uh without getting any backup from anybody telling him, yeah, go ahead and do that. So it's really cool just seeing these two uh monolithic characters butt heads with each other. They're both completely kind of stubborn in their own ways. One happens
Yeah.
to be more stubborn with his integrity, and the other happens to be more stubborn in terms of what he believes is best for the good of the United, for the good of the Earth, of planet Earth.
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of cool to watch those two be developed. I wish that season 3 would have covered all of book 3. You know what I mean? Like it would have taken more time to really draw out some of these character developments, especially with
Mm.
characters that we don't see a whole lot of, like those two. But I thought they were both great, and I was very intrigued and captured by the story as it was playing out.
And as someone who's read the books, do you think there was enough to work with for season 3 to have been just the third book?
I personally think so. Yeah. I think it would have been, they're going for trying to have a more fast-paced season because they were getting canceled, and that's, I guess, what we can get into. Um, is that the show I think at the start, I'm not sure at what point in production or if it was post-production that they knew that they were getting canceled. Um, but I think the show's strategy, looking at season 1 and then season 2 especially, where they're starting to cram books, 2 books into one season, that was kind of what they wanted to do, is just burn through the story as fast as possible, maybe for budget reasons or whatever. So I think there's enough content in each of the books to fill a full season easily.
Mm.
The pacing might have been a little bit off with some of the seasons, and I think that's what they wanted to have a little bit more consistency with, but definitely, yeah, I think they could have.
That's good context, because I never really thought about the cancellation, or at least the potential of cancellation, influencing where or how much they were going to try to fit into a season, if they were kind of thinking, well, let's fit as much of the books as we can before we might get canceled. So that makes a lot of sense, and certainly, I guess, doesn't drastically change how I feel about the season, but certainly makes the kind of jarring mid-season finale that we'll get to later make more sense, because it was kind of like, oh, this, like, this is a new season. Like, I didn't know how else to feel about it outside of, okay, this is episode 8 of season 3, but this is, like, definitely, we ended a storyline, and now
Yep.
we're kind of reintroducing these characters,
And
months or years later.
especially for book 4, that should have been drawn out. There was so much there. Like, characters were merged. So there's like Drummer, for example, is like 3 different characters in the books, like combined to one for the show. Entire characters are cut out that are pretty essential in the books. So they make it work, and it's great and everything. But yeah, a full season for each book would definitely have provided a lot of entertainment value and just depth for the viewer.
Wow. I had no idea about Drummer being 3 or merge characters, and I guess it makes sense that they need to do that, but I didn't realize that was what's happening, because she just seems like a very important person to the story, of course. And
Yeah.
when I do read the books, I'll be fascinated to see how that looks in regards to that character being spread out into 3, just because she is very obviously vital to this season. So wow, I had no idea.
It works really well. It works less well in later seasons when another character is replaced by her. But so far, for the 2 characters that she's basically taking the place of, 3 if you count Bull, I guess, it works. Yeah, it definitely works. It's efficient.
Nice. Yeah, I'll be interested to hear more about that as we get into later seasons, about how you feel about that character and how that maybe conflicts, and how they address that, since they did replace those characters. But yeah, that's pretty interesting. So that I think episode 3, I believe, is what we're on, ends with Christian telling the Rossi the truth about Aaron Wright and everything that Bobby saw on Ganymede. So we finally they get to get that full context of that. And one of my I don't want to say favorite scenes of the seasons, but certainly one I liked a lot was the way that episode ended with Christian and Naomi talking in the, I don't know, mess hall, for lack of better word, the kitchen. And we got to get this fun, like, Naomi despising her and kind of vice versa, and calling her out, saying like, oh, you're the person who gave Johnson the protomolecule, and her Naomi basically responding and saying like, well, I'm going to make sure Earth never gets their hands on this, kind of thing. And they're just kind of like, cool, well, I'm just going to keep eating my dinner now. And then they just kind of go about. But how did you feel about that scene? And is that kind of match the relationship they had in the books, or was there any sort of
Yeah,
interaction with
basically.
them in the books, or what
Yeah, I think there was, if I remember correctly, because she's on board the Rocinante for a while. So I think that scene is directly from the books. But any scene with Christian, just her bantering with any of the characters. My favorite is when she has interactions with Amos. I think we had some this season. There's some great scenes in the future of those two interacting. Um, yeah, it's just she's just such a great character. I love her so much. Casting is perfect. We've talked about this before in prior episodes. I can't imagine anyone else being Avasarala. And yeah, of course, anytime she's on the screen interacting with our main crew, it's a blast.
Yeah, I just really enjoyed that because it was very, I don't want to say hostile, but it kind of was a hostile conversation. And they were just like casually sitting in the kitchen because they just kind of end the conversation like, threatening each other. And then they just
Yeah.
kind of like share a joke and laugh. And then it cuts away and you're like, all right. This is
But that's
fine.
great though, isn't it? Like if you're sharing a space with somebody else and you have a difference with them, like ultimately you have to live with them in that space, even if you have,
Mhm.
and that's the Rocinante as a microcosm in some ways, but stretch that out, think of Earth and all the people who have differences on Earth. But at the end of the day, we're all still living here with each other on the planet. So, yeah, I like stuff like that where it's like you can have differences and butt heads and like really not like each other, and at the end of the day, you're still inhabiting the same space, and there's really not a whole lot you can do about that.
That is, yeah, that is very true. I don't think they had much of a choice in the matter in terms of them being around each other. So just thought it was a fun way to end that episode.
For sure.
So episode 4, actually having like gone through and reviewed each episode again, probably one of my more favorite episodes of the season in regards to with the Martians that they find, and then them trying to take over the Rossi. I just really like that whole sequence of things. But the season does start out with um, the president giving a speech after the devastation that happened. Then we find out that Aaron Wright had adjusted the speech behind her back to take a more
Mhm.
aggressive approach, I suppose, in regards to saying
Mhm.
like this was
Mhm.
justified. It's unfortunate that this happened, but ultimately we need to fight the Martians. So caused pretty big rift that was, I guess, already there in between her and Aaron Wright, and um, certainly was not appreciated by Anna in regards to her relationship with the president. So um, I it's funny to think about in the context if I was a citizen watching that, what the reaction would be. Obviously, we have plenty of examples of how people respond to politicians and the things that they say, in the world we live in right now. But I just wonder. I feel like that wouldn't have been the most popular approach. I don't know. When
It
I think about it,
was,
I feel
I
like maybe the
agree.
majority, at least, there certainly is going to be a subset that are going to be more aggressive and want to engage. But I don't know. I certainly didn't feel, uh, outside of the fact that we have more context, but I certainly didn't feel inspired by his speech if I was trying to put myself in the shoes of, I guess, Earth.
Yeah, it's a clever scene in some ways because as the speech is being delivered, you think it's going to go one way, right? Like the whole tone of the speech, the trajectory of the speech seems like he's going to go with Anna's point of view, and then it like suddenly changes, and that little moment of change is really cleverly written, because it fits. It makes it fit with the trajectory. You just realize that the trajectory, it wasn't what you thought it was. So a clever bit of writing, which I liked, but the reaction from everybody in the audience, like immediately applauding at the end of it, I'm like, I feel like there'd be some people who would be a little bit upset that this is the direction that Earth is going to take. Like, I can't imagine everyone there is a warmonger who, you know.
Right.
So, yeah, I imagining beyond just the audience, but like all Earthers watching this, like their entire future is like going to be decided for them based on what this man is about to do. I can't imagine everyone was happy about that for sure. Like, no way.
Yeah, and we also get the, again, I guess, conveniently timed matter of shortly into that episode with Christian convincing Holden to send the Aaron Wright recording to Anna, because I believe, if I remember correctly, it's her in her apartment really pissed off about the speech, and talked about, was I think talking to her wife about wanting to come home and all these things. And then, beep beep, gets her message, and it's a message from the Rossi with that video, and she projects that and watches it. So we immediately know, stuff's about to go down in regards to that. Like, we finally get to see what the result is going to be of that video getting out, because I certainly could have seen that being drawn out a little bit more. And I assume, correct me if I'm wrong, if I had to have guessed in the books, that maybe took a little longer to happen, because I guess in the context of the show, it was only a couple episodes.
Yeah, I forget the political stuff in the books, because like some of that stuff wasn't covered in the books. I'm trying to remember which part would have been. Yeah, so I don't remember off the top of my head. Some of the stuff, like especially earlier on in season 2 or season 1, was just completely original content. So I think that stuff was in the book too, but I can't remember exactly how that played out.
Yeah, was interested to see when she was going to play that trump card of the video, because certainly something she could have sat on for a while. But I did want to talk about, with this episode, I said one of the plot lines I liked was with them boarding the abandoned Martian ship and finding the three
of them,
three surviving Martians, who, again, it was kind of one of those things you're like, well, they're going to figure out eventually what ship they're on, and like, oh, this could be interesting. And pretty quickly we see them react to, wait, this is the Rossi, you guys aren't Martians. We're not pretty comfortable knowing that this is a ship that was taken over. This should be ours. How did you feel about that situation in terms of when they found? Did you think that was going to go that direction, or this was going to be something
whole
swept under the rug?
That whole sequence was peak sci-fi. I don't mean sci-fi science fiction. I mean sci-fi, the channel, making decisions like that for its it reminded me of some of the like stuff that happened in Battlestar Galactica as like filler content. And even like the acting of the 3 extras was like, okay, but it was a fun little inclusion to have, where that's a real threat. You have 3, I don't know if they were Marines or how trained they were, but 3 very capable soldiers who could, if they get their hands on weapons, could easily take over the ship, and they basically almost did. So probably, at least so far, the closest that the Rocinante has gotten to being taken over from James and the crew.
Yes, I agree. That probably is the closest they had, which would have been, I guess there's only 3 of them. Granted, there's not that many people on the Rossi, but that would have been interesting if they had gotten a little longer.
What would have been really interesting, in another world, in another telling of the story, is like, just imagine if, they kill the crew, and then now suddenly they're the main characters and they have to like figure out what to do, and then the story follows them for the rest of the story. That'd be kind of interesting and bold. That'd be like a kind of a Game of Thrones approach to storytelling.
That's certainly like a good what if episode, if there is the Expanse what if, like, what if the 3 Martians had killed the entire crew?
I need that. I would watch that. Wow, that's
what's so great about that concept, is you could apply that to like any show and people would watch it if they just literally came out with like, what if this happened in the show and that. So that's certainly amazing. That's certainly would be a very interesting one, where like, what if the Rocinante would have been murdered and the Martians took over the ship? Like,
there you go.
There we go.
Amazon likes money, maybe they'll do that one day. It's just make spin-offs.
Yeah, might as well just copy Disney at this point with that. But I guess at the very least, even though it is somewhat of a filler storyline, it did, I guess, for lack of a better word, conveniently provide a way for them to also get the Aaron Wright clip to the Martians as well, because that whole storyline ends with Bobby convincing them to not take over the ship, and that they'll help them get back to the Martians. And in exchange, Christian asked them to take the tape to their captain to watch, and then to send on to the Agatha King. So I guess at the end of the day, it did provide that avenue. So it wasn't a complete, filler thing. There was
for sure.
a
And
purpose behind that.
it might even be in the books. I just didn't like that part personally, but it's only there to drive the plot forward, which is fine. But yeah.
Yeah. Episode 4, another really good ending to an episode. We haven't really talked about Mao much. There was a couple notes I had throughout, but we did see, just to kind of go back a little bit, we did see Mao show a little bit of regret in regards to seeing these kids suffering. So I thought that was good to see in regards to him knowing that he was willing to push things like morality wise and ethics wise, but then kind of you see the break a little bit with the kids.
Yeah.
And
And it, man, that sets up the second half of season 3 too. Like, he sees May and he's not thinking about Clarissa, he's thinking about Julie,
yeah.
Which, man, we'll get to Clarissa either probably next episode, depending on where we end this episode. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it shows, he really loved Julie a lot, and he's
Yeah.
reminded of Julie by May, and it shows that he's not just purely a monster. He's a more complex figure than a lot of villains in shows like this, so I definitely appreciated that.
Yeah, it was a good character development moment just to see that, because I think it would have made certainly what happens later on in the show feel less significant if we kind of didn't have that context, that he did have at least some morality or some ethics and some heart in him in
Yeah,
regards
he feels bad about the terrible things he does, but he still
yeah.
does the things. So
Yeah, I'm not certainly not giving him any sort of,
we got a Mao apologist over here,
yeah,
ladies and gentlemen.
yeah, no. Right, certainly don't want that.
Yeah.
That'd be a good clickbait from the title for this episode. Say the Mao apologists, but
Mao did nothing wrong.
yeah. Oh boy, I'd love to see the comment section for that. But to transition to the fact that we very quickly see him change his tune when he finds out that Strickland had indeed continued the research despite Mao telling him to shut it down. He said, actually, great job continuing the work, because now we're seeing I can't remember the kid's name, but May's friend.
Katoa, I think Katoa.
Katoa, yeah. Now that, yeah, we'll go with Katoa for now, but we're seeing Katoa respond positively to the protomolecule in terms of him being a host and being able to communicate with the hive mind of the protomolecule. So he's encouraged by that and was basically like, cool, never mind, we're going to keep doing this, and also want to infect May as well because of that, since she is somebody that matches it. And one of the more shocking scenes, the way that this episode ends with Katoa taking apart the, I guess, nurse's essential body, like that, the way they shot that scene was really good, because I had because like Strickland and Mao don't really react the way you would think, after the fact when you see what they're seeing, because you see them come into the room and then they start having the interaction between themselves and Katoa, and they're talking, and then you get the slow pan where you see the body completely stripped out and like the nervous system and him like doing stuff with the brain, and you're like, oh, doing what he's doing to the human body, to what the protomolecule did basically on Venus with the ship. I was a little disconcerted by that, just in the sense that I feel like Mao and Strickland didn't react how certainly I would have reacted in that situation of like pure horror, because that certainly like is pretty gruesome, and they didn't hold back at all in terms of showing us what he was doing.
Yeah, it really shows they're no longer thinking about the human body. They're thinking about the future of humanity, but they don't see that as necessarily corresponding with our physical bodies. Like their understanding of the protomolecule are like, oh, cool, okay, we can change ourselves so that we can live in space. So like the way we exist right now doesn't really matter. And having the villains do that is really interesting, because then you start to see that that's how you dehumanize people, is by not viewing their bodies as having value. As soon as you're doing that, like just everything is just dehumanizing, and everything that comes out of it, even if you have these lofty ideas of transcending humanity, or having humanity transcend, like if you're dehumanizing the body, like it's not going to work out. Like whatever vision you have of the future of humanity has to include the human body. And so a lot's going on in that scene, and I'm really happy that we're spending some time talking about it, because I loved that scene. It shows
Hmm.
so much. It shows they're, they're kind of sociopaths in a way.
Yep.
But then you have this broader theme of what it means to be human, and it's showing exactly what the protomolecule is programmed to do, which is just to dissect things and analyze how they work. So it's a really cool scene. Probably one of my favorites in this season for sure.
Yeah, it certainly is one that sticks out, just probably mostly to do with just how shocking that, if you were to take a single screenshot, that would be like
Yeah.
encapsulate very much
And
of
the camera
what's going on.
angles, the camera angles, they were great too. I don't know if you can edit in maybe, but like having that the shot that they have of looking at Katoa and then the reveal, really cool.
Yeah, just love that. I loved what you had to say about their characters. I feel like if you're in their position, both Strickland and Mao, you just have to have passed a certain threshold in your mind about, I'm sure certain things like that bothers them to an extent, but you just kind of have to push through and just not, again, care. And the other part of dehumanizing is you have to be, you're dehumanizing everybody, not just the people you don't like, because
Right.
that was a employee that got murdered and ripped apart, but they very much are like, I'm sure in the back of their head they're like, oh, that sucks, like that was blah 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 and he was that.
Mm-hmm.
And then very quickly, the sociopathic part of them is like, but this shows us more about the protomolecule and its
Yep.
desire to learn
Yep.
and its desire to gather information and data, and that kind of expands its knowledge on the human race. And
It's such a good scene, dude. It's so good. Yeah. Like, yeah, it really does show so much about what drives them. Oh, I love it. I love it.
so good. Yeah, I might have to go back and watch that during the edit. So maybe I
For
will be
sure.
able to get that in there. So as we get into episode 5, we get the three Martians getting on their ship, passing along the tape to their captain, who, if I don't remember, I don't have it in my notes if she immediately sends it to the Agatha
Not
or if she.
immediately.
I don't think she
No.
does either.
No, there's a bit of hesitation where she's like, how do we know this is even real?
True. Yep.
And then I forget what the catalyst is that makes her decide to send that. But then, yeah, she does eventually.
Yeah. No. Now that you say that, I do remember there being hesitation, because and I guess rightfully so. They're going to be like, why would we trust, Christian and James Holden and these people who are, I guess in their eyes, they don't, I guess, necessarily view them as traitors, but they know that Earth sees them as traitors. In
And it's a
regards
good
to,
bit of foreshadowing too. Well,
yeah,
okay, two things. So the foreshadowing for sure, because well, let me do this first. So even by today's standards, people, we have deep fakes and stuff like that, where
yeah,
you can make somebody look like somebody else, or like with the changing your voice, so like you can be talking and the other person's voice is simultaneously being broadcast. So like even with today's technology, we can do stuff like that. Like imagine in 200, 300 years when
yeah,
so it's like the hesitancy, it'd be irresponsible if she wasn't hesitant about it. But then, yeah, of course, the second thing being in the second half of the season, somebody does use technology like that.
yeah.
So,
I was gonna say, like, yep, we're definitely gonna have another conversation about that at some point, because, and I remember, just to briefly touch on that, I do remember when that happened, I was like, yeah, I guess it makes sense that that technology is probably pretty advanced at this point. So it'd be kind of
mhm,
a, where we already live in a world where people struggle to find truth, or uh, figure out what is right and what is wrong and what's true and what's not true. I
mhm.
can't imagine as we progress that getting any easier, especially if we're able to deep fake. And while most people might be able to discern, like, oh, this is a deep fake just based off of knowing what to look for, there's going to be people who see that and don't question it, because we certainly see that in our world today, where something can get
Right.
posted and immediately. So
My head
that's,
canon
yeah.
for this show is that the reason that humanity was able to expand out into the solar system is because in that world they didn't have social media.
What if the Expanse had social media?
Yeah, it would just be,
It'd just be
Earth.
us now, just
Yeah,
to
just currently.
nobody got anything done.
Sad but true.
Yeah, so a major scene, to quickly go through a few things. We have the Christian and Holden conversation of her trying to reel him in to say, help us end this war, and he's very much over, I guess, his heroics, is I think is kind of how he talks about it. He's like, I've always been the guy who jumps in, and like I'm just ready to just not do that. I'm gonna
Mhm.
stop being the typical D&D character or group of people who just follows every side quest, which is something I did think about throughout the show. I'm like, this show, or at least this world, and I'm assuming the books feel this way to an extent, do very much feel like a D&D campaign, in the sense of it being like, here's a new quest, and then they have like a main overall quest, and then it's like all these little side quests happen as they go. And Holden's very much, I guess, the way that a lot of the characters I've played and like the groups I've played with is
Yes.
just kind of like, oh, the DM introduced this new side quest. Yeah, let's go check it out and see what it is. And that's basically what the show has
That's
been.
basically it. Well, have we talked about that before? How the origins of the books are in a tabletop role playing game?
I don't think we've had that conversation. No.
Yeah, so that's pretty. So like all of that is definitely a part of the soup here. That it's kind of boiled right in, where you have the two creators of the. Well, I don't know if it was both of them, but one of them for sure. I think was DMing a game, a sci-fi game, uh, with these characters, with this world, and then eventually the idea came along to like turn it into a book. So it continues to feel that way as the story progresses. It definitely is like a basically somebody writing a book about a campaign. It's really cool.
Yeah, and I don't even say that in a negative way. It's just
Not at
kind of
all.
the
It's
way
better
that
that
it
way.
feels, and it's funny that I was able to recognize that as like, this feels very campaignish, and I'm sure
Hmm.
many others have felt that way who are people who've played D&D or any sort of role playing tabletop. So that's interesting, because I was
Yeah.
like, this certainly feels like the way many people, or at least groups of people, if they were playing the individual characters, would probably respond to
And
the
personally,
show.
I prefer stories like this. Like this is definitely a character driven in some ways. Obviously
Mm-hmm.
there's the big concepts and everything, but people do what they're going to do. Like when you're playing a character, the question that you're always asking is, well, what would my character do? And what your character would do. There's a right and a wrong answer. Like you're either playing your character correctly and you do the thing that your character would do, or you do something else, which is sometimes fun. But like that's how people are in real life too. Like people just do what they're gonna do. Like and that's why I love James Holden. He sees a button, he's got to push it. Like that's what he would do.
That's his flaw, like in the character
Yeah.
sheet. That's
Yes,
his flaw.
exactly. Yep, but it's wonderful. I love it.
Yeah, it's his I don't remember what it's under, but it's like, it's his flaw, and it's his like what's the word I'm looking for?
There's bonds, there's what are the other ones? Depends what system I guess you're playing, like driving principles, there's motivations, like yeah, but it is that part of the character sheet, those four bubbles that you
Right.
fill out. Yeah.
I was gonna say, it's like it's under his flaw, but it's also like who he is as a person. It's like a positive part of him,
Yep.
that he's just always trying to do what's best. So
Well, and here, that's for the listeners and slash viewers who are watching this, think of your favorite fictional story, like novel that you've read, or whatever form of media that's fictional that you've read, and how much you love the characters because they do X, Y, or Z. Even if it's driven by flaws, you love that character. So to all
yeah,
the viewers, love your flaws. That's what makes you you.
yeah, and I liked what you had to say about when you're playing a tabletop game, and the character you're playing, and you're constantly playing through the lens of, what would my character do in this situation. And I they do a great job, and I'm assuming they do the same way in the books, is each character, from what I know about the character and the time we spent with them, I personally feel like I have a good idea how each of them would respond to a certain situation, and they have pretty consistently done what you think each character would
For
do, in
sure.
terms of how James would respond, how Naomi would respond, how
Hmm.
Amos would respond, and of course they each kind of follow a different archetype or type of character
Yeah.
in terms of, the leader and the engineer and
Hmm.
the brute or whatever,
All
however you
the
want to do it.
classes.
All
Yeah.
the classes, they're basically each their kind of own class, and you got the pilot, of course, and everything. So
Hmm.
I do, I'm saying that in the sense of I really like that, because you feel like you really understand the characters of like, this is what, when a situation happens, you can immediately go, okay, I already know how this character probably
Hmm.
feels about it. And I think that's a something a lot of shows, or even just however you're consuming it, whether it's books, shows, movies, doesn't necessarily always do a great job, because sometimes characters will do things that you're like, that
Why
makes no
though?
sense. And
Yeah.
there haven't been a lot of situations where that's
Yeah.
happened, to
Yeah.
me at least in the show.
There's never been a, oh well, that was in the script, so that's why that happened moment.
Right.
So, and when there is, when that it feels like that's happening, a lot of the times in the show, what, like with, I think about Naomi and some of the decisions that she makes, like so much of her backstory has yet to be revealed. And so some of the changes that the show has made with differences in the book still fits, in my opinion, because once you realize her backstory, these decisions make total sense. And I feel like that's true for a lot of the characters. I'm thinking Amos, Alex, Bobby for sure. So yeah, I really appreciate that about the show slash books.
Yeah, Naomi specifically is certainly a character that I felt we've gotten hints of her backstory, but not very much. So for considering how far into this show we are, she's certainly,
Hmm.
and I would assume that a lot of that is more present in the book in regards to, at this point, we
You don't find
Bob.
out. No, not really.
Oh,
You
you
don't
don't?
really
Okay,
find out until about book 5. Yeah. 4 and 5.
interesting. Okay, yeah, because I would have thought maybe there was a little bit more. So maybe that may certainly make sense that they're continuing to hold off on giving us too much of her
Hmm.
background than from what we have. So no, that's really cool. So I'm glad we were able to go off on that little tangent about
Yeah,
the
for sure.
characters, because just super fascinating as we get to know more and more about these characters. So
Agreed.
as we continue in episode 5, we get a little more interaction between Mao, Strickland, and Katoa, with him
Hmm.
communicating to, I believe he's in like some sort of cylinder, some sort of, you know, looks like a tanning bed, basically, kind of holding him in
Props. Yeah,
place.
another sci-fi feature here. Sci-fi the channel. Yeah, just some of the props they use is, yeah.
It's very, yeah, it is very sci-fi, literally and figuratively, in the sense of like sci-fi, the channel making that decision, and
Yeah.
sci-fi in terms of like, yeah, he's being held by these little, things that hold his arms down, and he's fine. It's science. It's
It'll
something
work.
sciencey is keeping
Yeah.
him down. But all that to say that it communicates to Mao and Strickland through the protomolecule, saying, the work is almost done, and it keeps saying the work, which is very
What did you think at this point? I need to know. So what was going through your mind? So already, so we had Eros crash into Venus, the um some hints about what was going on with some of the conversations with the scientists and stuff. What did you think the protomolecule was doing?
I think at the end of the day, it seemed like, at least the way that it responded, that it ultimately was just looking to take over our solar system and just kind of continue, at least in my mind at the time, continue its journey, I suppose. And
Sure.
our solar system is very much just kind of a blip on the radar kind of thing, just in
So
terms
almost
of
like
it.
a virus type of deal that's just spreading.
Yeah, essentially. And obviously we
Yeah.
see some melding of human and the protomolecule DNA with the experiments. But I think that's what essentially what I was thinking at the time. It's saying the work, and if at the time I probably would have said the work was just expand, I guess,
Yeah.
maybe the expanse, for the lack of a
That's
better
literally
words. So
100% what I was thinking, and for the same exact reasons. Like I thought the expanse like would be revealed to have to do with the expansion of this protomolecule through all of the galaxy. So I was definitely thinking that as well.
certainly not like a very complicated view that I had at the time, but very much just like, yep, it seems to be consistently just like, we want to understand what's going on here, and we're gonna just, and then once we're done with this solar system, we'll just continue on. And
Right.
that's what it's in a very complex but very simple way. That's
Hmm.
what it was trying to do.
Yeah.
And then we get the continuation of Wen taking over the Agatha King and him going to Io to essentially, my understanding was to get the protomolecule samples from Mao, so that they could take a hold of that. And then there we get, which again, a great scene in regards to the type of character Southerner is, uh, conducts a mutiny. And I want to get your thoughts on this, because to me, it's so fascinating that you know, we look at the evolution of our world in regards to fleets, soldiers to cavalry to navy to air force to space, and the structure and the way that they're treated is still very much the same in terms of like the way that the hierarchy works with lieutenants and captains. And
Mhm.
it's basically talked about like in the same way that we would expect like ships to be talked about in like
Oh, totally. Yeah.
Pirates of the Caribbean or something, where
Yeah.
it's very much like we're going to do a mutiny and take over the ship, and
Yeah.
you're going to do this. It's just kind of funny to see that through the
It's
lens
cool.
of like
Yeah,
science
it's
fiction.
true.
So I just was wondering if you had any thoughts of that, because I remember thinking terminology wise a lot of stuff they were using with like mutiny and just like the way that crews and sections of people on the ship very much
Mhm.
operate the same way that you would expect on like any other, whether it's a ship
For sure.
or something like that. So I just thought it was interesting, like, oh, here we are hundreds of years forward in our
Yeah.
from our world, but we're still the military is still very much treated in the same way with how they go about
Mhm.
things.
Yeah, I find that really fascinating too. And like, why not? Why wouldn't that be the case? Because, basically everything, the technology is much more advanced, but everything else is the same. You're separated from, uh, the central powers that could tell you what to do. We talked a little bit about that time delay with communications and like months of delay with personnel. Like if you needed help, you'd have to wait for a while for somebody to get
Yeah,
there, depending on where you are. And everything. So yeah, those same rules applying, things like mutiny. And yeah, it's cool. It's cool. I like seeing that. It is interesting to think about if, in reality, if that would be any different, depending on how things go. Like, I'm thinking in terms of sci-fi in the future with, if we're out in space and we have neural links in our minds, maybe there's just going to be a button to push, like in order to, instead of a mutiny, it's just like a shutdown type thing if somebody's acting out of protocol. But um, for the type of sci-fi that the Expanse is, where it's not like super duper futuristic, like cyberpunk type sci-fi, and
right.
more like hard sci-fi with these callbacks to, like you're talking about, the pirate genre that becomes a thing, especially in
Yeah,
later seasons as well. So like all these callbacks to different genres, they're fun, and it really does make you think. It's like, I wonder, like, if we were out there in space, is that how things would go down? And the technological differences between us here and the reality where we could be out in space, you have to wonder what would change sociologically and everything else. But in the meantime, it sure is a lot of fun to watch a mutiny on a spaceship.
exactly. I think that's what made me think about it. It was just like, oh, we're watching this thing go down, but just very, we've seen similar scenes in other movies, but maybe not necessarily in the same context of, like you said, a hard sci-fi where it's very much, you feel like what you're watching is technically possible within the realm of where technology is going currently. And it's not like some, there's not magic in the sense of
Yeah.
the way that we think of sci-fi fantasy Star Wars with like the Force and stuff, but
Yeah.
outside of maybe the proto molecule being something that's an unknown thing, but
Yeah.
still within the realm of possibility of like us finding some sort of alien life that's very much outside of our understanding of how they go about things.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and you summed it up exactly. The Expanse is all about looking at where we are now and our understanding of physics, um, and then just applying that forward. So nothing too heady or too like, I want to use the word kind of psychedelic, like you kind of see in some other sci-fi, or uh, magical, to use your words, that you would see in something like Star Wars or that realm of fantasy sci-fi. So it's cool. I like it. I'm a sucker for this genre.
Yeah, no, I think we're in the same boat there for sure. So To go back to the mutiny, unfortunately, doesn't last very long because Southerner and his followers are killed by Wen and the rest of the crew. So that didn't
Mhm.
work. Mutiny did not work, and very unfortunately, we lose Southerner as a very
Nope.
character that certainly I liked very much. So I was very sad to see him go, but glad they're not afraid, I guess, to kill off characters that we like. In terms of borrowing, I guess that thought process from Game of Thrones in regards to maybe not to the same level of how important the characters are to it, but yeah, was just very interesting to see him die the way that he did. But I guess honorable in the way of he was doing what he thought was right, and that's basically what we said when we first met him, is that he seems like a character who has a moral code and he's going to do it, and he's willing to do a mutiny, which is probably something he thought he would never have to do, because he could tell something was wrong and he didn't believe in the mission or the concept that they were pursuing.
Yeah, Souther is a great example of the central theme, in my opinion, of the show, or at least the books, of people doing what they're going to do. We're predictable, and in some ways, kind of like programs that are running. You have the source code, and that's pretty much going to run. There might be a few blips here and there that cause somebody to act out of character, but Souther really shows, of course, once you know a character, you know what he's going to do. And in the situation like that, where you had two characters that weren't compatible with their viewpoints, it was going to end in bloodshed, like we saw.
Yeah, so Southerner is killed, the rest of his crew is killed, and then we get Wen launching the proto-molecules out of Io. So I think we technically do see the crew land on Io, the Rossi crew, to because they were on their way there for the sake of Prax to figure out what was going on. I believe
Right.
was
Yeah.
the motivation behind that. So we see them land
We
trying
have
to get
not
in.
talked enough about Prax. That's okay, but he's such a great character. I
He
loved
is, and yeah,
Prax.
we will talk about him very soon. I was looking ahead at our notes, and because there's some really great Prax scenes. But yeah, love his character. But so we see them land trying to get into the station on Io where Strickland and Mao are. Wen is, I believe, just somewhere on the outskirts of the planet, and he gets remote access to shoot the protomolecule samples out, and he's sending those towards Mars. So that, I believe, is where that episode ends, and then that leads us into episode 6. And this is actually the last episode before the break, it looks like. So probably likely the last episode we'll discuss on this first part. But as we were hinting at just a second ago, starts out very strong. And again, I've probably said this more than once. One of my favorite parts of the entire season is the Rossi crew getting into the station and ultimately capturing Mao. But then we get the scene where Strickland is trying to hold the kids hostage, and the scene I want to talk about where he said, yeah, well, where we're going to talk about Prax here is we finally get to see Prax and May reunite. That was very emotional for me. Again, as someone with kids, I was like, yep, I knew this was going to be, when it happened, I knew it was going to be emotional. I knew I was going to react emotionally. And not to say again that people who don't have kids can't put themselves in that shoes, but I certainly was just like, yep, this, I'm very glad that it happened, because I very easily could have seen the show take a much more morbid turn in terms of May either dying or getting converted, and Prax having to deal with that. So I was very happy to see them get reunited. And then we do have a moment where we think Prax might kill Strickland. And again, and I have to ask you about this a little bit, but for the sake of having not talked about him so far, I absolutely love the relationship between Amos and Prax, because it's very it's stereotypical in the sense that it's the kind of the nerdy dad who just wants to find his daughter, and then you have like kind of the emotionalist brute who like distance himself from everybody. He's very matter of fact, and they're friends. Like, that's not like a new concept.
Yeah.
But just like the way that they interact with each other, I think is just so great, because you just, for the first time, you're really seeing Amos be very empathetic towards somebody. And he very easily could have just been, I guess, a dick, for the lack of a better word, but he very much takes him under his wing and says like, hey, I want to help you find your daughter. I'm going to help you learn how to shoot a gun. I'm going to do all these things. And I'm sure, Prax taught him a couple things, but I just
Mhm.
absolutely loved that because it very easily could have been very silly, I guess, or very unrealistic in terms of their connection or the relationship they have, calling him his best friend
Yeah, and
at one
genuinely
moment
too.
and
Yeah, I think
genuinely
that
meaning
was
that.
genuine. Yeah.
I just absolutely love that. But how did you feel about that relationship, and is that something that's present in the books in regards
Yeah,
to their
absolutely.
interactions with one another?
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. What Amos does, because Amos is kind of lacking that inner moral compass, and
Mhm.
he's aware of it, which a lot of people who lack that don't have that. They're just like, they just go along and they aren't even aware that they are, doing terrible things. But Amos recognizes that he's missing that. And so what he does is he surrounds himself with people who he knows he can rely on to be a moral compass for him. So, like in
Mm,
his head, he's like, well, I don't know if this thing that I'm doing is good, but I know that this good person is going to do it. So I'm going to do it too. And that's kind of Amos's whole thing that, keeps him like he doesn't ever really develop empathy in the traditional sense, which by the way I just learned today that empathy as a word didn't really come into like public usage until like the 1950s, and it was only the
wow.
early 20th century that it was introduced into English in the first place. So uh, neither here nor there, but an interesting tidbit for our viewers, I guess. um, but I love that interaction between him and Prax, where he recognizes Prax is a good person. He sees Prax as kind of a figure that was lacking in his childhood. So Amos loves children. Like he just is, because of his own childhood that we later learn about, he is very adamant about avenging and protecting children.
Mm,
And so he cares about Prax for two reasons: seeing that he's a good person, and then also recognizing the importance and like the need to reunite him with his child, because he knows what happens basically if that were not to happen, for both the dad and for the kid. So really cool. And then yeah, that scene where he's about to where Prax is about to shoot Strickland, and of course the line, if you want to deliver it,
well, which one are you referring to?
where he's like, you're not that guy.
Yeah, exactly. You're not the guy. Well, I wanted to before that, I wanted to call out that I thought that was a great. I love that moment for Amos because it really showed his, I don't know if emotional intelligence is the word I'm looking for, but basically him recognizing that like I could very easily could have seen Amos be like, this is important for you to do this in terms of the finality or I guess closure with
Yeah.
everything that happened with May and his relationship with Strickland beforehand and him trusting Strickland. I could have seen Amos be like, no man, you need to do this thing. And that I guess could have also worked.
Mm-hmm.
But and like you said, him essentially, grabbing him by the arm says, you're not that guy. And then of course they leave. And again, love the scene. I remember it happened. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, I don't know if I laughed, but like laughed in like a way like, oh my gosh, this is so awesome. But he
Yep.
says,
Yep.
but I am.
Yep.
And then the
I'm
door
that guy.
shuts
Yep.
and the blood splatter. I just remember being like,
Yep.
that was the most BA
Mm-hmm.
scene, like in the entire show, quite literally, even though there's been like cooler things that have happened in terms of like stylistically that have happened in the show, but that's got to be one of my favorite moments just
Oh,
because
it's
again,
great.
what it meant for Amos, what it meant for Prax, where it's obviously a very emotional scene surrounded by, May getting reunited and then finally getting the justice that he wants, but that, Amos is the one to say like, hey, this isn't something, you don't need this. You have May, we can move on, but like, I'm going to, I'm going to take care of this because, that's the type of person I am and I'm
Yep.
going to do that. But yeah, what was your reaction to
It
the
was awesome.
actual,
It was so great.
shot
That moment.
happening?
Yeah, that moment. So I'm sure we'll have a couple people at least from Reddit watching up to this point right now. And for myself and for those of you who were active on the Expanse subreddit the day that this episode came out, yeah, that was posted all over, that
Okay.
it was immediately to kind of turned into a meme, and just people like lauding that scene and like praising how awesome it was, and how yeah, how cool it was and how perfect that moment was for Amos, as like, he knows himself. He knows exactly who he is. And because of that, he can tell when people are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Like,
Right.
he knows he's capable of uh, murdering, basically. I mean, it's deserved, but there's no trial. It's just he's being judge, jury, and executioner. He's
Yeah.
perfectly comfortable doing that, but he knows that if Prax were to do that, he'd feel guilty about it, and it would eat him up inside over time and really do harm to him psychically. And so Amos has no problem with that. He's going to sleep just fine that night. He'll probably sleep better.
Yeah. And I assume when the show was coming out live in terms of the weekly episodes, that I'm assuming Amos was already a character a lot of people loved, but if I had to have guessed, that scene the second it happened really shifted even more so just in terms of people's love for Amos. Was that the case that you saw on like
It
the
sure
subreddit and
seemed that
everything?
way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sure seemed that way with how much he was posted over the front page of that subreddit, and the top comment in the discussion for that, I believe, was that line and discussion of that line.
I
So
could see that. Yeah.
yeah, it was a great moment.
Yeah. It was it's certainly a moment where, once I'm officially caught up with the show and I'm able to like really feel comfortable going into the subreddit and like digging deeper and like maybe sorting by some of the top posts, I can see where those things land in the hierarchy of how people responded. So I'm sure that'll be
For
high up,
sure.
but
For
yeah,
sure.
excited to see that. So definitely just wanted to cover that scene because it is, again, one of my
Definitely.
favorite scenes. So many great character moments. We get a lot of justice. We get Prax and May reunited. So it was just like, again, kind of felt like we were getting very close to the finale of where the season could end, and we hinted at it before. There's kind of a mid-season finale here on this episode, with the second half being with a new season essentially, and where the books split. But
What I will
just wanted
say
to,
at this point, because we're getting close to wrapping up this episode, I know, and I think we have one or two more points in this episode to
couple
talk
more.
about at
Yep.
least. But what I will say is, I was feeling that, where it was like, oh man, we're only on episode 6, or 6, I think.
6. Yeah.
And it's already feeling like, that was that book. That book's done. Now we're on to the next book already. And it sucked because I knew that the show had been canceled. I'm like, I just
Okay.
gotta savor every moment of this. But it really did feel bad that we were burning through the material so quickly. It's like, well, it's better than nothing. But at this point, as I was watching it, it really struck me how quickly we were going through it. And I had really, really I was really sad about it, because I was loving the show. I discovered the show about a few months prior to season 3 airing. So, you find this thing that you love and you burn through it, you binge it, and then you start watching the new season, and then you find out it's going to be canceled, and that was a
Yeah.
bummer. So very happy that it got renewed.
Yeah. And I certainly was feeling that too, where as a non book reader and things like that, where we were getting to all this happening and I was like, so we still have, was it 7 episodes left? Like, where could we possibly go from here? Which, again, we'll get there on the next part 2 of this for season 3, where there's very much a shift and a time jump and things like that. So that made more sense when it happened, but I certainly was like, how is this cohesively as a season going to move forward, since we're getting these major plot points wrapped up? But we can move on to the next point, where we do have Agatha King getting hit by one of the proto-molecule missiles, and we get a great ending for, I don't know, great. You're shaking your head, so I'm interested to
I'm
see what
shaking
that's
my head at
about.
something
But
else. Yeah, we'll get to
yeah,
that.
yeah, with Cotillard ultimately destroying the ship, blowing it up because he didn't want the proto-molecule to spread based off of what he knew about it. So I guess a good ending for a noble character. But I want to go into. You're shaking your head because I assume it has something to do with this.
It has to do with the
potentially.
zombies. Like, it was
Yeah,
just,
yeah. Tell me what how you feel
I
about
didn't
that, because
like
you had
it.
a strong reaction.
Yeah, no, I didn't like that zombie genre inclusion in this episode, with the proto molecules spreading so quickly and turning people into like rageful zombies that were killing each other. Like, that seemed, I don't know, I didn't like it. That's just me. I just personally didn't like it. I loved the Kodiar scene, the tension of him, being chained in his
Oh, right. Yeah.
auto dock in the med bay, and then that lady coming in, and she's already infected, and the whole trope, the zombie trope there, that was a little cheesy, very sci-fi, but it was
And again,
cool
sci-fi as in regard to the channel,
as
the
in regard
company.
to the channel. Yeah, but a great ending for the character. He was a complex character as well.
Yeah.
Very much a gray character rather than a black or white character, and so him choosing to go out that way, it it probably wasn't the best thing to do, since they needed the extra time on the ship, but it's totally what he would have done. And again, coming back to that theme, people are going to do what they're going to do, regardless
Yeah.
of if it helps our main characters or not.
True. Yeah. Certainly did not seem out of character. It wasn't one of those like, he's the last person I would ever expect. It was very like, yep, he's seems like the type of guy who would sacrifice himself for the greater good and destroy
Yep.
the ship. And
After
of
what
course,
he's been through, yep, for sure.
right, exactly. He he knew what the proto-molecule was capable of, and he was going to do everything he could to stop that in any way he could, and he did. So just thought it was a great ending to his character. Could have been certainly an interesting character to have around longer, but
Oh yeah, it would have been cool, but it makes sense.
Yeah, totally makes sense with what they're going on with. So with the proto-molecule missiles being launched towards Mars, we get once again our good friend Johnson, who is called up by Naomi to destroy the samples, basically putting Johnson in the position of, we need your help and to do this thing. And of course, leaving a door open for Johnson to take a path to serve the belt over, I guess, humanity as a whole. So, him taking the proto-molecules for his, or I guess more proto-molecule because he already had a sample, but in his mind, potentially getting a leg up on the war with whatever he felt like he could do with weaponizing the proto-molecule. So it was interesting. I wasn't necessarily expecting to see him again in that context of putting him in a position of power, but of course he does ultimately go about destroying them. But what did you think about that scene in regards to him being called up? Did you feel he was going to put himself in a position to benefit the belt or benefit, I guess, humanity? Or did you have a particular thought on where you thought that was going to head?
He's a good politician, so moments like this that's where his character really shines, where he sees an opportunity and he's going to take it to bolster his own power in the belt, his own faction in the belt with Tycho Station. Yeah, definitely a cool. I wish we would have had more Fred Johnson in this season, just
and Dawes
in general, and Dawes, man.
Love Dawes.
Yeah. By the way, I watched Foundation, the first 2 episodes of Foundation, where we see the actor who plays Dawes.
Oh, he's in that.
He's really good in that. The first episode is amazing. Definitely recommend watching the first episode. And then it kind of peters out after that, but he gives a heck of a performance as always. And I think that may have been why he wasn't available for later seasons of The Expanse as well.
Oh, interesting.
But man, I love Dawes.
Shows.
Yeah, I really wish he would have been in the season. More Fred, more Dawes.
Yeah,
would have been awesome.
Yeah, so we get that situation where Johnson helps out with the destruction of the rest of the samples. And then again, another situation where we're feeling like we're ending a season where we get some resolution with Aaron Wright ultimately being exposed, president getting, or Naomi showing the president the ship, and very much Aaron Wright holding his ground, I suppose, and saying like, all right,
Anna showing
it. Sorry, Anna. Anna. Yeah, I said Naomi. Anna exposing Aaron Wright, and then we get the interaction of them confronting him and him very much standing his ground of kind of like, I've been caught and I know how this is going to go, so I'm going to say everything that I've wanted to say in terms of calling the president weak, essentially, and I'm doing this for Earth and what I think is best, and you just don't have the gall or the balls to do what needs to be done. So how did that live up to your expectation in regards to how that plot line was going to end with Aaron Wright. And I
Man,
guess another a question I would have is just again kind of looping in the books was that how things went down in regards to his, I guess, takedown, for lack of a better word.
it's great. I feel like a bit of a broken record here, but again, he's doing exactly what he would do. Like
Yeah.
he's driven. He knows that he feels internally justified by his actions. So there's no guilt or anything. Like I think he's bummed out that his plans didn't work, but he
Yeah.
views I can't remember the name. What's the president's name? Mr. President, whatever his name is.
Isn't it like Esteban or something like that?
Maybe.
Is that a different character?
I don't remember, so I
We'll
can't say
call him
for
Mr.
sure.
President.
Mr. President. Mr. President is a very weak character. Like I think
Yeah.
Sadavar says like he's like a goldfish where like the last thing you tell him is what he's going to think. Like so if he's in a room with somebody, he'll walk out of that room with whatever that person just told him until he talks to somebody else who tells him something else. And that's totally it. Like and a lot of politicians are like that, unfortunately, but Anna sees that in him too,
Yeah.
at the end of that scene. Mr. President shifts again where he's like very clearly not driven by any internal ideology. It's just he's doing whatever he thinks is going to be politically advantageous at the time. And the moment where Sadavar and Anna are both just in the end disgusted by that really summarizes that character. So yeah, it's cool. And it sets up, of course, Christian becoming the new Mr. President.
So yeah, it was again
General Secretary, that's what it is.
General Secretary. Okay, yeah. She's not going to be Mr. President. Right where I was going with that, but what I was going to go into was the very last thing we're going to talk about here is the again when I look at that bullet point, I just see the image in my head is we finally see, I suppose, the result of what's been going on Venus with the protomolecule structure beginning to rise. In my notes, I put brain-like, like it very much looked like a brain or jellyfish, I suppose, in regards to
kind of with like the nervous system, like spinal cord coming down from below it. Yeah, I can see that.
Exactly. So, and I assume it probably got that inspiration from the deconstruction of the human that it did in terms of understanding, I suppose, how at least humans work in terms of their, the brain and the stem cell and the brain stem and things like that.
Yep. I dig it.
So
I can see that.
Thought that was very, very, very interesting, and certainly was an interesting way to end that episode. Because again, it felt, and I've said again, I'm also a broken record. Felt like the end of a season because I was like, how could we possibly continue this without it being like a clean cut, which is, I guess, ultimately what they did. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that final scene?
No. I gotta ask, what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts.
Yeah, because I think by this point in the show, I had been caught up in the books for what had happened, so I was expecting it. But when you saw that happening, what did you think was going on?
I wish I had a better answer in the sense that I had like a theory. I guess my initial thought was that the structure or the being what was probably I guess the next stage of manifestation for the protomolecule, whether that's, what we have of the protomolecule being just whatever its basic state is that we see it in from the samples, where it's some sort of harvestable thing. And then we have like the hybrids, which is a much more advanced fusion of that. And I guess my thoughts would have been at the time were that this was probably the next step of that, where it's a more potentially more aggressive version of the protomolecule. It has more facets, I get, as its disposal in regards to being more aggressive with the way that it could attack or react to things, is probably how I would have seen that. So
kind of still in that virus spreading idea where it's now just something that can do even more damage to the host
Yeah, yeah,
system.
exactly. It's very much obviously, like you said, the virus undertones of the way that it spreads, but this being very much like its own thing where it's not um taking over its surroundings per se, which I guess is what it did in terms of this structure, I suppose,
Hmm.
but very much just becoming its own thing as opposed to we're going to take over Eros and or we're going to take over this body or we're going to do this. It's very much just like this is going to become it's the kind of the mothership of the protomolecule.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Like, I wish I could remember what I was thinking at that point. That's one of those things where I kind of wish I had been going into that episode blind, not knowing what was going on. Like, for example, when I watched, I think it was episode 5 of season 2, or maybe episode 4, but whenever Eros crashes into Venus, like, I had not been caught up in the books yet. I think I just started the
Mm-hmm.
book at that point. So that blew my mind. I'm like, what is going on? And I kind of wish I had seen this scene with that similar mindset. It was cool. It was a cool visual.
Yeah, very, very, very cool visual. Certainly, one I would like to use in regards to this video, but probably won't
Hmm.
in terms of spoilers. But I think this is a really good spot to stop in terms of part 1 of season 3. So we will jump.
Perfect.
We'll do a separate episode for the second half of season 3 where we'll get to talk about the ring, which I'm very excited about because I
Hmm.
was like, okay, where
Oh
are we going?
man.
Like, was
Oh
very
man.
much like surprised, but very excited at the prospect of that and what I know about you in regards to your love of sci-fi and aliens and things like that. I was
100%.
like,
Yep.
this is right up Josh's
Yep.
alley. So
Things get
super excited.
crazy.
Yeah,
Hmm.
super excited to get into that. So for anybody that's still watching, first of all, thank you. For, if you're watching all of these, I'm always amazed to see that people make it this far. So appreciate that. So definitely check out Josh's channel, Comic Q. I know it's been a little while since you've posted, but I know you have
Yeah, I
some
got some
plans
stuff
to.
there. Yeah, for sure. But 100% leave a comment down below with your thoughts. What jumped out to
Mhm.
you from these first 6 episodes? We'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, definitely let us know. Love having conversation with you guys. So Josh and I will pop down there if anybody does, and have some back and forth there. So check out Josh's channel. It should be right below him. Definitely subscribe if you're interested in these conversations. Been getting subscribers from these videos, which has been awesome. Getting connected with the Expanse community. Most recent video I did was a retrospect review of the movie Excalibur from 1981. So go give that a look if you're interested. And we'll be doing some other videos like that as we go along. And of course, we'll continue these conversations with Josh about the Expanse and probably a couple other things as well. But certainly want to keep doing the Expanse because we're getting a lot of cool engagement and people watching. So
And
super
hopefully by the
excited.
time season 6 comes out, we can be doing that as they come out, which would be
Yeah,
cool.
that would be cool to be able to do smaller episodes with that. So hopefully get through that. So we will keep you guys updated on that. So subscribe if you want to see part 2 of this. Go check out the other episodes and again, let us know what you think. So Josh, any other final thoughts you want to give before we close
I
out?
am so excited for the second part of this season. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, me as well. So thanks again, guys.